Book 7, Chapter 5 of The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 7, Chapter 5 The Two Men Clothed in Black. The personage who entered wore a black gown and a gloomy mien. The first point which struck the eye of our Jehan, who, as the reader will readily surmise, had ensconced himself in his nook in such a manner as to enable him to see and hear everything at his good pleasure, was the perfect sadness of the garments and the visage of this newcomer. There was, nevertheless, some sweetness diffused over that face, but it was the sweetness of a cat or a judge, an affected, treacherous sweetness. He was very grey and wrinkled, and not far from his 60th year. His eyes blinked, his eyebrows were white, his lips pendulous, and his hands large. When Jehan saw that it was only this, that is to say, no doubt a physician or a magistrate, and that this man had a nose very far from his mouth, a sign of stupidity, he nestled down in his hole, in despair at being obliged to pass an indefinite time in such an uncomfortable attitude and in such bad company. The archdeacon, in the meantime, had not even risen to receive this personage. He had made the latter a sign to seat himself on a stool near the door, and after several moments of a silence which appeared to be a continuation of a proceeding meditation, he said to him in a rather patronizing way, "Good day, Master Jacques." "Greeting, master," replied the man in black. There was in the two ways in which Master Jacques was pronounced on the one hand, and the master by preeminence on the other, the difference between Monseigneur and Monsieur, between Domine and Domni. It was evidently the meeting of a teacher and a disciple. "Well," resumed the archdeacon, after a fresh silence which Master Jacques took good care not to disturb, "how are you succeeding?" "Alas, master," said the other with a sad smile, "I am still seeking the stone. Plenty of ashes, but not a spark of gold." Dom Claude made a gesture of impatience. "I am not talking to you of that, Master Jacques Charmillieu, but of the trial of your magician. Is it not Marc Senen that you call him, the butler of the Court of Accounts? Does he confess his witchcraft? Have you been successful with the torture?" "Alas, no," replied Master Jacques, still with his sad smile. "We have not that consolation. That man is a stone. We might have him boiled in the Marche à Porceau before he would say anything. Nevertheless, we are sparing nothing for the sake of getting at the truth. He is already thoroughly dislocated. We are applying all the herbs of St. John's day, as saith the old comedian Plautus, adversum stimulos laminas crucesque compadescu, neros catinas carceres numeles pedicus boias. Nothing answers. That man is terrible. I am at my wits' end over him." "You have found nothing new in his house?" "I'faith, yes," said Master Jacques, fumbling in his pouch. "This parchment. There are words in it which we cannot comprehend. The criminal advocate, Monsieur Philippe Lollier, nevertheless, knows a little Hebrew, which he learned in that matter of the Jews of the Rue Quatresten at Brussels." So saying, Master Jacques unrolled a parchment. "Give it here," said the archdeacon, and casting his eyes upon this writing, "Pure magic, Master Jacques," he exclaimed. "Emen hetan. It is the cry of the vampires when they arrive at the witches' sabbath. Per ipsum et cum ipso et in ipso. 'Tis the command which changed the devil in hell. Ax, pax, max, that refers to medicine, a formula against the bite of mad dogs. Master Jacques, you are procurator to the king in the ecclesiastical courts. This parchment is abominable. We will put the man to the torture once more. Here again," added Master Jacques, fumbling afresh in his pouch, is something that we have found at Marc Senan's house." It was a vessel belonging to the same family as those who covered Dom Claude's furnace. "Ah," said the archdeacon, "a crucible for alchemy." "I will confess to you," continued Master Jacques, with his timid and awkward smile, "that I have tried it over the furnace, but I have succeeded no better than with my own." The archdeacon began an examination of the vessel. "What has he engraved on this crucible? Ugh, ugh, the word which expels fleas! That Marc Senan is an ignoramus. I verily believe that you will never make gold with this. 'Tis good to set in your bedroom in summer, and that is all." "Since we are talking about errors," said the king's procurator, "I have just been studying the figures on the portal below before ascending hither. Is your reverence quite sure that the opening of the work of physics is there portrayed on the side towards the Hôtel Dieu, and that among the 7 nude figures which stand at the feet of Notre-Dame, that which has wings on his heels is Mercurius?" "Yes," replied the priest. "'Tis Augustin Nifo who writes it, that Italian doctor who had a bearded demon who acquainted him with all things. However, we will descend, and I will explain it to you with the text before us." "Thanks, master," said Charmelot, bowing to the earth. "By the way, I was on the point of forgetting. When doth it please you that I shall apprehend the little sorceress?" "What sorceress?" "That gypsy girl, you know, who comes every day to dance on the church square, in spite of the official's prohibition. She hath a demoniac goat with horns of the devil, which reads, which writes, which knows mathematics like Picatrix, and which would suffice to hang all Bohemia. The prosecution is all ready. 'Twill soon be finished, I assure you. A pretty creature, on my soul, that dancer. The handsomest black eyes. 2 Egyptian carbuncles. When shall we begin?" The archdeacon was excessively pale. "I will tell you that hereafter," he stammered, in a voice that was barely articulate. Then he resumed with an effort, "Busy yourself with Marc Senan." "Be at ease," said Charmelot with a smile. "I'll buckle him down again for you on the leather bed when I get home. But 'tis a devil of a man. He wearies even Periat Torturou himself, who hath hands larger than my own. As that good Plautus saith, Nudus victus centum pondo, es quando pendes per pidis. The torture of the wheel and axle. 'Tis the most effectual. He shall taste it." Dom Claude seemed absorbed in gloomy abstraction. He turned to Charmelot. "Master Pierrat, Master Jacques, I mean, busy yourself with Marc Senan." "Yes, yes, Dom Claude. Poor man, he will have suffered like Mummol. What an idea to go to the witches' Sabbath! A butler of the Court of Accounts, who ought to know Charlemagne's text, Striga vel Masia. In the matter of the little girl, Esmeralda as they call her, I will await your orders. Ah, as we pass through the portal, you will explain to me also the meaning of the gardener painted in relief, which one sees as one enters the church. Is it not the sower? Eh, master, of what are you thinking, pray?" Dom Claude, buried in his own thoughts, no longer listened to him. Charmelot, following the direction of his glance, perceived that it was fixed mechanically on the great spider's web which draped the window. At that moment a bewildered fly which was seeking the March sun flung itself through the net and became entangled there. On the agitation of his web, the enormous spider made an abrupt move from his central cell, then, with one bound, rushed upon the fly, which he folded together with his 4 antennae, while his hideous proboscis dug into the victim's head. "Poor fly," said the king's procurator in the ecclesiastical court, and he raised his hand to save it. The archdeacon, as though roused with a start, withheld his arm with convulsive violence. "Master Jacques," he cried, "let fate take its course." The procurator wheeled round in affright. It seemed to him that pincers of iron had clutched his arm. The priest's eye was staring, wild, flaming, and remained riveted on the horrible little group of the spider and the fly. "Oh, yes," continued the priest, in a voice which seemed to proceed from the depths of his being. "Behold here, a symbol of all. She flies, she is joyous, she is just born. She seeks the spring, the open air, liberty. Oh, yes, but let her come in contact with the fatal network, and the spider issues from it, the hideous spider. Poor dancer, poor predestined fly. Let things take their course, Master Jacques. 'Tis fate. Alas, Claude, thou art the spider. Claude, thou art the fly also. Thou wert flying towards learning, light, the sun. Thou hast no other care than to reach the open air, the full daylight of eternal truth. But in precipitating thyself towards the dazzling window which opens upon the other world, upon the world of brightness, intelligence, and science, blind fly, senseless learned man, thou hast not perceived that subtle spider's web, stretched by destiny betwixt the light and thee. Thou hast flung thyself headlong into it, and now thou art struggling with head broken and mangled wings between the iron antennae of fate. Master Jacques, let the spider work its will." "I assure you," said Charmelot, who was gazing at him without comprehending him, "that I will not touch it. But release my arm, master, for pity's sake. You have a hand like a pair of pincers." The archdeacon did not hear him. "Oh, madman!" he went on, without removing his gaze from the window. "And even couldst thou have broken through that formidable web, with thy gnat's wings, thou believest that thou couldst have reached the light? Alas, that pane of glass which is further on, that transparent obstacle, that wall of crystal, harder than brass, which separates all philosophies from the truth, how wouldst thou have overcome it? Oh, vanity of science! How many wise men come flying from afar to dash their heads against thee! How many systems vainly fling themselves buzzing against that eternal pain!" He became silent. These last ideas, which had gradually led him back from himself to science, appeared to have calmed him. Jacques Charmelot recalled him wholly to a sense of reality by addressing to him this question: "Come, now, master, when will you come to aid me in making gold? I am impatient to succeed." The archdeacon shook his head with a bitter smile. "Master Jacques, read Michel Sellos' Dialogus de Energia et Operatione Daemonum. What we are doing is not wholly innocent." "Speak lower, master. I have my suspicions of it," said Jacques Charmelot. "But one must practice a bit of hermetic science when one is only procurator of the king in the ecclesiastical court, at 30 crowns tournois a year. Only speak low." At that moment the sound of jaws in the act of mastication, which proceeded from beneath the surface, struck Charmelot's uneasy ear. "What's that?" he inquired. It was the scholar, who, ill at ease and greatly bored in his hiding-place, had succeeded in discovering there a stale crust and a triangle of mouldy cheese, and had set to devouring the whole without ceremony, by way of consolation and breakfast. As he was very hungry, he had made a great deal of noise, and he accented each mouthful strongly, which startled and alarmed the procurator. "'Tis a cat of mine," said the archdeacon quickly, "who is regaling herself under there with a mouse." This explanation satisfied Charmelot. "In fact, master," he replied, with a respectful smile, "all great philosophers have their familiar animal. You know what Servius saith, 'Nullus inum locus sine genio est,' for there is no place that hath not its spirit." But Dom Claude, who stood in terror of some new freak on the part of Jehan, reminded his worthy disciple that they had some figures on the façade to study together, and the two quitted the cell, to the accompaniment of a great oof from the scholar, who began to seriously fear that his knee would acquire the imprint of his chin. End of Book 7, Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 7, Chapter 6. The Effect Which 7 Oaths in the Open Air Can Produce. "Te Deum laudamus!" exclaimed Master Jehan, creeping out from his hole. "The screech-owls have departed! Ach! Ach! Hacks, packs, macks, fleas, mad dogs, the devil! I have had enough of their conversation. My head is humming like a bell-tower, and mouldy cheese to boot. Come on, let us descend, take the big brother's purse, and convert all these coins into bottles." He cast a glance of tenderness and admiration into the interior of the precious pouch, readjusted his toilet, rubbed up his boots, dusted his poor half-sleeves, all grey with ashes, whistled an air, indulged in a sportive pirouette, looked about to see whether there were not something more in the cell to take, gathered up here and there on the furnace some amulet in glass which might serve to bestow, in the guise of a trinket, on Isabel la Thierry, finally pushed open the door which his brother had left unfastened as a last indulgence, and which he, in his turn, left open as a last piece of malice, and descended the circular staircase, skipping like a bird. In the midst of the gloom of the spiral staircase, he elbowed something which drew aside with a growl. He took it for granted that it was Quasimodo, and it struck him as so droll that he descended the remainder of the staircase holding his sides with laughter. On emerging upon the Place, he laughed yet more heartily. He stamped his foot when he found himself on the ground once again. "Oh," said he, "good and honourable pavement of Paris! Cursed staircase, fit to put the angels of Jacob's ladder out of breath! What was I thinking of to thrust myself into that stone gimlet which pierces the sky? All for the sake of eating bearded cheese, and looking at the bell-towers of Paris through a hole in the wall." He advanced a few paces, and caught sight of the two screech-owls, that is to say, Dom Claude and Master Jacques Charmelot, absorbed in contemplation before a carving on the façade. He approached them on tiptoe, and heard the archdeacon say in a low tone to Charmelot, "'Twas Guillaume de Paris who caused a Job to be carved upon this stone of the hue of lapis lazuli, gilded on the edges. Job represents the philosopher's stone, which must also be tried and martyrized in order to become perfect, as saith Raymond Lullet, sub conservatione formoe specifito salva anima." "That makes no difference to me," said Jehan. "'Tis I who have the purse." At that moment he heard a powerful and sonorous voice articulate behind him a formidable series of oaths. "Sang Dieu! Ventre Dieu! Bede Dieu! Corps de Dieu! Nom brille de Belzébuth! Nom d'un pape! Comme et tonnerre!" "Upon my soul," exclaimed Jehan, "that can only be my friend Captain Phoebus." This name of Phoebus reached the ears of the archdeacon at the moment when he was explaining to the king's procurator the dragon which is hiding its tail in a bath, from which issue smoke and the head of a king. Dom Claude started, interrupted himself, and, to the great amazement of Charmelot, turned round and beheld his brother Jehan accosting a tall officer at the door of the Gondelaurier mansion. It was, in fact, Captain Phoebus de Chateaupay. He was backed up against a corner of the house of his betrothed, and swearing like a heathen. "By my faith, Captain Phoebus," said Jehan, taking him by the hand, "you are cursing with admirable vigour." "Horns and thunder!" replied the captain. "Horns and thunder yourself," replied the student. "Come now, fair captain, whence comes this overflow of fine words?" "Pardon me, good comrade Jehan," exclaimed Phoebus, shaking his hand. "A horse going at a gallop cannot halt short. Now, I was swearing at a hard gallop. I have just been with those prudes, and when I come forth, I always find my throat full of curses. I must spit them out or strangle. Ventre et tonnerre." "Will you come and drink?" asked the scholar. This proposition calmed the captain. "I'm willing, but I have no money." "But I have." "Bah! Let's see it." Jehan spread out the purse before the captain's eyes, with dignity and simplicity. Meanwhile the archdeacon, who had abandoned the dumbfounded Charmelot where he stood, had approached them and halted a few paces distant, watching them without their noticing him, so deeply were they absorbed in contemplation of the purse. Phoebus exclaimed, "A purse in your pocket, Jehan! 'Tis the moon in a bucket of water. One sees it there, but 'tis not there. There's nothing but its shadow. Pardieu, let us wager that these are pebbles." Jehan replied coldly, "Here are the pebbles wherewith I pave my fob." And without adding another word, he emptied the purse on a neighbouring post with the air of a Roman saving his country. "True God!" muttered Phoebus. "Targes, big blanks, little blanks, maillet, every two worth one of our tournay, farthings of Paris, real eagle yards. 'Tis dazzling." Jehan remained dignified and immovable. Several yards had rolled into the mud. The captain, in his enthusiasm, stooped to pick them up. Jehan restrained him. "Fie, Captain Phoebus de Chateaupay!" Phoebus counted the coins, and turning towards Jehan with solemnity, "Do you know, Jehan, that there are 23 sous parisis? Whom have you plundered tonight, in the street cut Voisin?" Jehan flung back his blond and curly head, and said, half closing his eyes disdainfully, "We have a brother who is an archdeacon and a fool." "Corne Dieu!" exclaimed Phoebus. "The worthy man!" "Let us go and drink," said Jehan. "Where shall we go?" said Phoebus. "To Eve's Apple?" "No, Captain, to ancient science. An old woman sawing a basket-handle, 'tis a rebus, and I like that." "A plague on rebuses, Jehan. The wine is better at Eve's Apple. And then, beside the door, there is a vine in the sun which cheers me while I am drinking." "Well, here goes for Eve and her apple," said the student, and taking Phoebus's arm. "By the way, my dear captain, you just mentioned the Rue Coupe-Goulet. That is a very bad form of speech. People are no longer so barbarous. They say coupe-gorge." The two friends set out towards Eve's Apple. It is unnecessary to mention that they had first gathered up the money, and that the archdeacon followed them. The archdeacon followed them, gloomy and haggard. Was this the Phoebus whose accursed name had been mingled with all his thoughts ever since his interview with Gringoire? He did not know it, but it was at least a Phoebus, and that magic name sufficed to make the archdeacon follow the two heedless comrades with the stealthy tread of a wolf, listening to their words and observing their slightest gestures with anxious attention. Moreover, nothing was easier than to hear everything they said, as they talked loudly, not in the least concerned that the passers-by were taken into their confidence. They talked of duels, wenches, wine-pots, and folly. At the turning of a street, the sound of a tambourine reached them from a neighbouring square. Dom Claude heard the officer say to the scholar, "Thunder! Let us hasten our steps." "Why, Phoebus?" "I'm afraid lest the Bohemian should see me." "What Bohemian?" "The little girl with the goat." "La Esmeralda?" "That's it, Jehan. I always forget her devil of a name. Let us make haste. She will recognize me. I don't want to have that girl accost me in the street." "Do you know her, Phoebus?" Here the archdeacon saw Phoebus sneer, bend down to Jean's ear, and say a few words to him in a low voice. Then Phoebus burst into a laugh, and shook his head with a triumphant air. "Truly?" said Jean. "Upon my soul," said Phoebus. "This evening?" "This evening." "Are you sure that she will come?" "Are you a fool, Jean? Does one doubt such things?" "Captain Phoebus, you are a happy gendarme." The archdeacon heard the whole of this conversation. His teeth chattered. A visible shiver ran through his whole body. He halted for a moment, leaned against a post like a drunken man, then followed the two merry knaves. At the moment when he overtook them once more, they had changed their conversation. He heard them singing at the top of their lungs the ancient refrain: "Les enfants des petits carreaux se font pendre comme des veaux." The children of the petits carreaux let themselves be hung like calves. End of Book 7, Chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 7, Chapter 7. The Mysterious Monk. The illustrious wine-shop of Eve's Apple was situated in the University, at the corner of the Rue de la Rondelle and the Rue de la Boutonniere. It was a very spacious and very low hale on the ground floor, with a vaulted ceiling whose central spring rested upon a huge pillar of wood painted yellow. Tables everywhere, shining pewter jugs hanging on the walls, always a large number of drinkers, a plenty of wenches, a window on the street, a vine at the door, and over the door a flaring piece of sheet-iron, painted with an apple and a woman, rusted by the rain and turning with the wind on an iron pin. This species of weather-vane which looked upon the pavement was the signboard. Night was falling. The square was dark. The wine-shop, full of candles, flamed afar like a forge in the gloom. The noise of glasses and feasting, of oaths and quarrels, which escaped through the broken panes, was audible. Through the mist which the warmth of the room spread over the window in front, 100 confused figures could be seen swarming, and from time to time a burst of noisy laughter broke forth from it. The passers-by, who were going about their business, slipped past this tumultuous window without glancing at it. Only at intervals did some little ragged boy raise himself on tiptoe as far as the ledge, and hurl into the drinking-shop that ancient, jeering hoot with which drunken men were then pursued. "Aoul! Saul! Saul! Saul!" Nevertheless, one man paced imperturbably back and forth in front of the tavern, gazing at it incessantly, and going no further from it than a pikeman from his sentry-box. He was enveloped in a mantle to his very nose. This mantle he had just purchased of the old clothesman in the vicinity of the Eve's Apple, no doubt to protect himself from the cold of the March evening, possibly also to conceal his costume. From time to time he paused in front of the dim window with its leaden lattice, listened, looked, and stamped his foot. At length the door of the dram-shop opened. This was what he appeared to be waiting for. Two boon companions came forth. The ray of light which escaped from the door crimsoned for a moment their jovial faces. The man in the mantle went and stationed himself on the watch under a porch on the other side of the street. "Comme et tonnerre," said one of the comrades. 7 o'clock is on the point of striking. 'Tis the hour of my appointed meeting." "I tell you," repeated his companion with a thick tongue, "that I don't live in the Rue des Mauvais Parallels, indignus qui inter mala verba habitat. I have a lodging in the Rue Jean Pain Mollet, in vico Johannes Pain Mollet." "You are more horned than a unicorn, if you assert the contrary. Everyone knows that he who once mounts astride a bear is never after afraid. but you have a nose turned to dainties like Saint Jacques of the hospital." "Jehan, my friend, you are drunk," said the other. The other replied, staggering, "It pleases you to say so, Phoebus, but it hath been proved that Plato had the profile of a hound." The reader has no doubt already recognized our two brave friends, the captain and the scholar. It appears that the man who was lying in wait for them had also recognized them, for he slowly followed all the zigzags that the scholar caused the captain to make, who, being a more hardened drinker, had retained all his self-possession. By listening to them attentively, the man in the mantle could catch in its entirety the following interesting conversation. "Corbacque! Do try to walk straight, Master Bachelor. You know that I must leave you. Here, it is 7 o'clock. I have an appointment with a woman." "Leave me, then. I see stars and lances of fire." "You are like the Chateau de Martin, which is bursting with laughter." "By the worts of my grandmother, Jean, you are raving with too much rabidness. By the way, Jean, have you any money left?" "Monsieur Rector, there is no mistake. The little butcher shop, Parva Bucceria." "Jean, my friend Jean, you know that I made an appointment with that little girl at the end of Point Saint-Michel, and I can only take her to the Falordels, the old crone of the bridge, and that I must pay for a chamber. The old witch with a white moustache would not trust me. Jean, for pity's sake, have we drunk up the whole of the cure's purse? Have you not a single parisis left?" "The consciousness of having spent the other hours well is a just and savory condiment for the table." "Belly and guts! A truce to your whimsical nonsense! Tell me, Jean of the devil, have you any money left? Give it to me, bête Dieu, or I will search you, were you as leprous as Job and as scabby as Caesar." "Monsieur, the Rue Galiache is a street which hath at one end the Rue de la Verrerie, and at the other the Rue de la Tixeranderie." "Well, yes, my good friend Jean, my poor comrade, the Rue Galiache is good, very good. But in the name of heaven, collect your wits. I must have a sous parisis, and the appointment is for 7 o'clock. Silence for the rondo, and attention to the refrain. Quand les rats mangeront les casses, le roi sera seigneur d'Arras. Quand la mer qui est grandade, sera le sang gelé. On verra par-dessous la glace, sortir sa d'Arras de leur place." "Well, scholar of Antichrist, may you be strangled with the entrails of your mother!" exclaimed Phoebus, and he gave the drunken scholar a rough push. The latter slipped against the wall and slid flabbily to the pavement of Philippe Augustus. A remnant of fraternal pity, which never abandons the heart of a drinker, prompted Phoebus to roll Jean with his foot upon one of those pillows of the poor, which Providence keeps in readiness at the corner of all the street-posts of Paris, and which the rich blight with the name of a rubbish-heap. The captain adjusted Jean's head upon an inclined plane of cabbage stumps, and on the very instant the scholar fell to snoring in a magnificent bass. Meanwhile, all malice was not extinguished in the captain's heart. "So much the worse if the devil's cart picks you up on its passage," he said to the poor, sleeping clerk, and he strode off. The man in the mantle, who had not ceased to follow him, halted for a moment before the prostrate scholar, as though agitated by indecision. Then, uttering a profound sigh, he also strode off in pursuit of the captain. We, like them, will leave Jean to slumber beneath the open sky, and will follow them also, if it pleases the reader. On emerging into the Rue Saint-André d'Arc, Captain Phoebus perceived that someone was following him. On glancing sideways by chance, he perceived a sort of shadow crawling after him along the walls. He halted, it halted. He resumed his march, it resumed its march. This disturbed him not overmuch. "Ah, bah!" he said to himself. "I have not a sou." He paused in front of the Collège d'Autun. It was at this college that he had sketched out what he called his studies, and, through a scholar's teasing habit which still lingered in him, he never passed the façade without inflicting on the statue of Cardinal Pierre Bertrand, sculptured to the right of the portal, the affront of which Priapus complained so bitterly in the satire of Horace. Olim truncus, iram feculnus. He had done this with so much unrelenting animosity that the inscription Aduensis Episcopus had become almost effaced. Therefore he halted before the statue according to his wont. The street was utterly deserted. At the moment when he was coolly retying his shoulder knots, with his nose in the air, he saw the shadow approaching him with slow steps, so slow that he had ample time to observe that this shadow wore a cloak and a hat. On arriving near him, it halted and remained more motionless than the statue of Cardinal Bertrand. Meanwhile it riveted upon Phoebus two intent eyes, full of that vague light which issues in the night-time from the pupils of a cat. The captain was brave, and would have cared very little for a highwayman, with a rapier in his hand. But this walking statue, this petrified man, froze his blood. There were then in circulation strange stories of a surly monk, a nocturnal prowler about the streets of Paris, and they recurred confusedly to his memory. He remained for several minutes in stupefaction, and finally broke the silence with a forced laugh. "Monsieur, if you are a robber, as I hope you are, you produce upon me the effect of a heron attacking a nutshell. I am the son of a ruined family, my dear fellow. Try your hand near by here. In the chapel of this college there is some wood of the true cross set in silver." The hand of the shadow emerged from beneath its mantle and descended upon the arm of Phoebus with the grip of an eagle's talon. At the same time the shadow spoke. "Captain Phoebus de Chantopé." "What the devil?" said Phoebus. "You know my name." "I know not your name alone," continued the man in the mantle with his sepulchral voice. "You have a rendezvous this evening." "Yes," replied Phoebus in amazement. "At 7 o'clock." "In a quarter of an hour." "At La Falourdels." "Precisely." "The lewd hag of the Pont Saint-Michel." "Of Saint-Michel the Archangel, as the Pater Noster saith." "Impious wretch," muttered the spectre, "with a woman?" "Confiteor, I confess." "Who is called?" "La Esmeralda," said Phoebus gaily. All his heedlessness had gradually returned. At this name the shadow's grasp shook the arm of Phoebus in a fury. "Captain Phoebus de Chantopé, thou liest!" Anyone who could have beheld at that moment the captain's inflamed countenance, his leap backwards, so violent that he disengaged himself from the grip which held him, the proud air with which he clapped his hand on his sword-hilt, and, in the presence of this wrath, the gloomy immobility of the man in the cloak, anyone who could have beheld this would have been frightened. There was in it a touch of the combat of Don Juan and the statue. "Christ and Satan!" exclaimed the captain. "That is a word which rarely strikes the ear of a Chantopé. Thou wilt not dare repeat it." "Thou liest," said the shadow coldly. The captain gnashed his teeth. Surly monk, phantom, superstitions, he had forgotten all at that moment. He no longer beheld anything but a man and an insult. "Ah, this is well," he stammered in a voice stifled with rage. He drew his sword, then stammering, for anger as well as fear makes a man tremble. "Here, on this spot! Come on! Swords! Swords! Blood on the pavement!" But the other never stirred. When he beheld his adversary on guard and ready to parry, "Captain Phoebus," he said, and his tone vibrated with bitterness, "you forget your appointment." The rages of men like Phoebus are milk soups, whose ebullition is calmed by a drop of cold water. This simple remark caused the sword which glittered in the captain's hand to be lowered. "Captain," pursued the man, "tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, a month hence, 10 years hence, you will find me ready to cut your throat. But go first to your rendezvous." "In sooth," said Phoebus, as though seeking to capitulate with himself, "these are two charming things to be encountered in a rendezvous, a sword and a winch. But I do not see why I should miss the one for the sake of the other, when I can have both." He replaced his sword in its scabbard. "Go to your rendezvous," said the man. "Monsieur," replied Phoebus with some embarrassment, "many thanks for your courtesy. In fact, there will be ample time tomorrow for us to chop up Father Adam's doublet into slashes and buttonholes. I am obliged to you for allowing me to pass one more agreeable quarter of an hour. I certainly did hope to put you in the gutter, and still arrive in time for the fair one, especially as it has a better appearance to make the women wait a little in such cases. But you strike me as having the air of a gallant man, and it is safe to defer our affair until tomorrow. So I will betake myself to my rendezvous. It is for 7 o'clock, as you know." Here Phoebus scratched his ear. "Ah, comme Dieu! I had forgotten. I haven't a sou to discharge the price of the garret, and the old crone will insist on being paid in advance. She distrusts me." "Here is the wherewithal to pay." Phoebus felt the stranger's cold hand slip into his a large piece of money. He could not refrain from taking the money and pressing the hand. "Vrai Dieu!" he exclaimed, "you are a good fellow." "One condition," said the man. "Prove to me that I have been wrong and that you were speaking the truth. Hide me in some corner whence I can see whether this woman is really the one whose name you uttered." "Oh," replied Phoebus, "'tis all one to me. We will take the Sainte Marthe chamber. You can look at your ease from the kennel hard by." "Come, then," said the shadow. "At your service," said the captain. "I know not whether you are Messer Diabolus in person, but let us be good friends for this evening. Tomorrow I will repay you all my debts, both of purse and sword." They set out again at a rapid pace. At the expiration of a few minutes the sound of the river announced to them that they were on the Pont Saint-Michel, then loaded with houses. "I will first show you the way," said Phoebus to his companion. "I will then go in search of the fair one who is awaiting me near the Petit Châtelet." His companion made no reply. He had not uttered a word since they had been walking side by side. Phoebus halted before a low door, and knocked roughly. A light made its appearance through the cracks of the door. "Who is there?" cried a toothless voice. "Corpe Dieu! Tête Dieu! Ventre Dieu!" replied the captain. The door opened instantly, and allowed the newcomers to see an old woman and an old lamp, both of which trembled. The old woman was bent double, clad in tatters, with a shaking head, pierced with 2 small eyes, and coiffed with a dishclout. Wrinkled everywhere, on hands and face and neck, her lips retreated under her gums, and about her mouth she had tufts of white hairs which gave her the whiskered look of a cat. The interior of the den was no less dilapidated than she. There were chalk walls, blackened beams in the ceiling, a dismantled chimney-piece, spiders' webs in all the corners, and in the middle a staggering herd of tables and lame stools, a dirty child among the ashes, and at the back a staircase, or rather a wooden ladder, which ended in a trap-door in the ceiling. On entering this lair, Phoebus's mysterious companion raised his mantle to his very eyes. Meanwhile the captain, swearing like a Saracen, hastened to "make the sun shine in a crown," as saith our admirable Regnier. "The Sainte Marthe chamber," said he. The old woman addressed him as Monseigneur, and shut up the crown in a drawer. It was the coin which the man in the black mantle had given to Phoebus. While her back was turned, the bushy-headed and ragged little boy who was playing in the ashes adroitly approached the drawer, abstracted the crown, and put in its place a dry leaf which he had plucked from a faggot. The old crone made a sign to the two gentlemen, as she called them, to follow her, and mounted the ladder in advance of them. On arriving at the upper story, she set her lamp on a coffer, and Phoebus, like a frequent visitor of the house, opened a door which opened on a dark hole. "Enter here, my dear fellow," he said to his companion. The man in the mantle obeyed without a word in reply. The door closed upon him. He heard Phoebus bolt it, and a moment later descend the stairs again with the aged hag. The light had disappeared. End of Book 7, Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 7, Chapter 8. The Utility of Windows Which Open on the River. Claude Frollo, for we presume that the reader, more intelligent than Phoebus, has seen in this whole adventure no other surly monk than the archdeacon, Claude Frollo groped about for several moments in the dark lair into which the captain had bolted him. It was one of those nooks which architects sometimes reserve at the point of junction between the roof and the supporting wall. A vertical section of this kennel, as Phoebus had so justly styled it, would have made a triangle. Moreover, there was neither window nor air-hole, and the slope of the roof prevented one from standing upright. Accordingly, Claude crouched down in the dust and the plaster which creaked beneath him. His head was on fire. Rummaging around him with his hands, he found on the floor a bit of broken glass, which he pressed to his brow, and whose coolness afforded him some relief. What was taking place at that moment in the gloomy soul of the archdeacon, God and himself could alone know. In what order was he arranging in his mind La Esmeralda, Phoebus, Jacques Charmilou, his young brother so beloved, yet abandoned by him in the mire, his archdeacon's cassock, his reputation perhaps dragged to La Falourdels, all these adventures, all these images? I cannot say. But it is certain that these ideas formed in his mind a horrible group. He had been waiting a quarter of an hour. It seemed to him that he had grown a century older. All at once he heard the creaking of the boards of the stairway. Someone was ascending. The trapdoor opened once more. A light reappeared. There was a tolerably large crack in the worm-eaten door of his den. He put his face to it. In this manner he could see all that went on in the adjoining room. The cat-faced old crone was the first to emerge from the trapdoor, lamp in hand. Then Phoebus, twirling his moustache. Then a third person, that beautiful and graceful figure, La Esmeralda. The priest beheld her rise from below like a dazzling apparition. Claude trembled. A cloud spread over his eyes. His pulses beat violently. Everything rustled and whirled around him. He no longer saw nor heard anything. When he recovered himself, Phoebus and Esmeralda were alone seated on the wooden coffer, beside the lamp which made these two youthful figures and a miserable pallet at the end of the attic stand out plainly before the archdeacon's eyes. Beside the pallet was a window, whose panes, broken like a spider's web upon which rain has fallen, allowed a view, through its rent meshes, of a corner of the sky, and the moon lying far away on an eider-down bed of soft clouds. The young girl was blushing, confused, palpitating. Her long, drooping lashes shaded her crimson cheeks. The officer, to whom she dared not lift her eyes, was radiant. Mechanically, and with a charmingly unconscious gesture, she traced with the tip of her finger incoherent lines on the bench, and watched her finger. Her foot was not visible. The little goat was nestling upon it. The captain was very gallantly clad. He had tufts of embroidery at his neck and wrists, a great elegance at that day. It was not without difficulty that Dom Claude managed to hear what they were saying, through the humming of the blood which was boiling in his temples. A conversation between lovers is a very commonplace affair. It is a perpetual "I love you," a musical phrase which is very insipid and very bald for indifferent listeners, when it is not ornamented with some fioriture, but Claude was not an indifferent listener. "Oh," said the young girl, without raising her eyes, "do not despise me, Monseigneur Phoebus. I feel that what I am doing is not right." "Despise you, my pretty child?" replied the officer with an air of superior and distinguished gallantry. "Despise you? Tête Dieu! And why?" "For having followed you." "On that point, my beauty, we don't agree. I ought not to despise you, but to hate you." The young girl looked at him in affright. "Hate me? What have I done?" "For having required so much urging." "Alas," said she, "'tis because I am breaking a vow. I shall not find my parents. The amulet will lose its virtue. But what matters it? What need have I of father or mother now?" So saying, she fixed upon the captain her great black eyes, moist with joy and tenderness. "Devil take me if I understand you!" exclaimed Phoebus. La Esmeralda remained silent for a moment, then a tear dropped from her eyes, a sigh from her lips, and she said, "Oh, Monseigneur, I love you." Such a perfume of chastity, such a charm of virtue surrounded the young girl that Phoebus did not feel completely at his ease beside her. But this remark emboldened him. "You love me!" he said with rapture, and he threw his arm round the gypsy's waist. He had only been waiting for this opportunity. The priest saw it, and tested with the tip of his finger the point of a poniard which he wore concealed in his breast. "Phoebus," continued the Bohemian, gently releasing her waist from the captain's tenacious hands, "you are good, you are generous, you are handsome. You saved me, me, who am only a poor child lost in Bohemia. I had long been dreaming of an officer who should save my life. 'Twas of you that I was dreaming, before I knew you, my Phoebus. The officer of my dream had a beautiful uniform like yours, a grand look, a sword. Your name is Phoebus. 'Tis a beautiful name. I love your name. I love your sword. Draw your sword, Phoebus, that I may see it." "Child," said the captain, and he unsheathed his sword with a smile. The gypsy looked at the hilt, the blade, examined the cipher on the guard with adorable curiosity, and kissed the sword, saying, "You are the sword of a brave man. I love my captain." Phoebus again profited by the opportunity to impress upon her beautiful bent neck a kiss which made the young girl straighten herself up as scarlet as a poppy. The priest gnashed his teeth over it in the dark. "Phoebus," resumed the gypsy, "let me talk to you. Pray walk a little, that I may see you at full height, that I may hear your spurs jingle. How handsome you are!" The captain rose to please her, chiding her with a smile of satisfaction. "What a child you are! By the way, my charmer, have you seen me in my archer's ceremonial doublet?" "Alas, no," she replied. "It is very handsome." Phoebus returned and seated himself beside her, but much closer than before. "Listen, my dear." The gypsy gave him several little taps with her pretty hand on his mouth, with a childish mirth and grace and gaiety. "No, no, I will not listen to you. Do you love me? I want you to tell me whether you love me." "Do I love thee, angel of my life?" exclaimed the captain, half kneeling. "My body, my blood, my soul, all are thine. All are for thee. I love thee, and I have never loved anyone but thee." The captain had repeated this phrase so many times, in many similar conjectures, that he delivered it all in one breath, without committing a single mistake. At this passionate declaration the gypsy raised to the dirty ceiling which served for the skies a glance full of angelic happiness. "Oh," she murmured, "this is the moment when one should die." Phoebus found the moment favourable for robbing her of another kiss, which went to torture the unhappy archdeacon in his nook. "Die!" exclaimed the amorous captain. "What are you saying, my lovely angel? 'Tis a time for living, or Jupiter is only a scamp. Die at the beginning of so sweet a thing. Cornet de boeuf, what a jest! It is not that." "Listen, my dear similar Esmeralda. Pardon, you have so prodigiously Saracen a name that I never can get it straight. 'Tis a thicket which stops me short." "Good heavens!" said the poor girl, "and I thought my name pretty because of its singularity. But since it displeases you, I would that I were called Gotan." "Ah, do not weep for such a trifle, my graceful maid. 'Tis a name to which one must get accustomed, that is all. When I once know it by heart, all will go smoothly. Listen then, my dear Similar, I adore you passionately. I love you so that 'tis simply miraculous. I know a girl who is bursting with rage over it." The jealous girl interrupted him. "Who?" "What matters that to us?" said Phoebus. "Do you love me?" "Oh," said she. "Well, that is all. You shall see how I love you also. May the great devil Neptunus spear me if I do not make you the happiest woman in the world. We will have a pretty little house somewhere. I will make my archers parade before your windows. They are all mounted, and set at defiance those of Captain Mignon. There are Vougiers, Cranaquiniers, and Han Colavenier. I will take you to the great sights of the Parisians at the storehouse of Roulis. 8,000 armed men, 30,000 white harnesses, short coats or coats of mail. The 67 banners of the trades, the standards of the parliaments, of the Chamber of Accounts, the treasury of the generals, of the aids of the mint. A devilish fine array, in short. I will conduct you to see the lions of the Hôtel de Roy, which are wild beasts. All women love that." For several moments the young girl, absorbed in her charming thoughts, was dreaming to the sound of his voice, without listening to the sense of his words. "Oh, how happy you will be!" continued the captain, and at the same time he gently unbuckled the gypsy's girdle. "What are you doing?" she said quickly. This act of violence had roused her from her reverie. "Nothing," replied Phoebus. "I was only saying that you must abandon all this garb of folly, and the street corner when you are with me." "When I am with you, Phoebus," said the young girl tenderly. She became pensive and silent once more. The captain, emboldened by her gentleness, clasped her waist without resistance, then began softly to unlace the poor child's corsage, then disarranged her tucker to such an extent that the panting priest beheld the gypsy's beautiful shoulder emerge from the gauze, as round and brown as the moon rising through the mists of the horizon. The young girl allowed Phoebus to have his way. She did not appear to perceive it. The eye of the bold captain flashed. Suddenly she turned towards him. "Phoebus," she said, with an expression of infinite love, "instruct me in thy religion." "My religion!" exclaimed the captain, bursting with laughter. "I instruct you in my religion? Corne à tonnerre! What do you want with my religion?" "In order that we may be married," she replied. The captain's face assumed an expression of mingled surprise and disdain, of carelessness and libertine passion. "Oh, bah!" said he. "Do people marry?" The Bohemian turned pale, and her head drooped sadly on her breast. "My beautiful love," resumed Phoebus tenderly, "what nonsense is this? A great thing is marriage, truly. One is none the less loving for not having spit Latin into a priest's shop." While speaking thus in his softest voice, he approached extremely near the gypsy. His caressing hands resumed their place around her supple and delicate waist. His eye flashed more, and everything announced that Monsieur Phoebus was on the verge of one of those moments when Jupiter himself commits so many follies that Homer is obliged to summon a cloud to his rescue. But Dom Claude saw everything. The door was made of thoroughly rotten cast staves, which left large apertures for the passage of his hawk-like gaze. This brown-skinned, broad-shouldered priest, hitherto condemned to the austere virginity of the cloister, was quivering and boiling in the presence of this night scene of love and voluptuousness. This young and beautiful girl given over in disarray to the ardent young man made melted lead flow in his veins. His eyes darted with sensual jealousy beneath all those loosened pins. Anyone who could, at that moment, have seen the face of the unhappy man glued to the worm-eaten bars would have thought that he beheld the face of a tiger glaring from the depths of a cage at some jackal devouring a gazelle. His eyes shone like a candle through the cracks of the door. All at once, Phoebus, with a rapid gesture, removed the gypsy's gorgerette. The poor child, who had remained pale and dreamy, awoke with a start. She recoiled hastily from the enterprising officer, and casting a glance at her bare neck and shoulders, red, confused, mute with shame, she crossed her two beautiful arms on her breast to conceal it. Had it not been for the flame which burned in her cheeks at the sight of her so silent and motionless, one would have declared her a statue of modesty. Her eyes were lowered. But the captain's gesture had revealed the mysterious amulet which he wore about her neck. "What is that?" he said, seizing this pretext to approach once more the beautiful creature whom he had just alarmed. "Don't touch it," she replied quickly. "'Tis my guardian. It will make me find my family again, if I remain worthy to do so. Oh, leave me, Monsieur le Capitaine. My mother, my poor mother, my mother, where art thou? Come to my rescue. Have pity, Monsieur Phoebus. Give me back my gorgerette." Phoebus retreated amid, said in a cold tone, "Oh, mademoiselle, I see plainly that you do not love me." "I do not love him!" exclaimed the unhappy child, and at the same time she clung to the captain, whom she drew to a seat beside her. "I do not love thee, my Phoebus? What art thou saying, wicked man, to break my heart? Oh, take me, take all! Do what you will with me, I am thine. What matters to me the amulet? What matters to me my mother? 'Tis thou who art my mother, since I love thee. Phoebus, my beloved Phoebus, dost thou see me? 'Tis I. Look at me. 'Tis the little one whom thou wilt surely not repulse, who comes herself to seek thee. My soul, my life, my body, my person, all is one thing. Which is thine, my captain? Well, no, we will not marry, since that displeases thee. And then, what am I? A miserable girl of the gutters, whilst thou, my Phoebus, art a gentleman. A fine thing truly. A dancer wed an officer? I was mad. No, Phoebus, no. I will be thy mistress, thy amusement, thy pleasure, when thou wilt. A girl who shall belong to thee. I was only made for that, soiled, despised, dishonored, but what matters it? Beloved, I shall be the proudest and the most joyous of women, and when I grow old or ugly, Phoebus, when I am no longer good to love you, you will suffer me to serve you still. Others will embroider scarfs for you. 'Tis I, the servant, who will care for them. You will let me polish your spurs, brush your doublet, dust your riding boots. You will have that pity, will you not, Phoebus? Meanwhile, take me. Here, Phoebus, all this belongs to thee. Only love me. We gypsies need only air and love. So saying, she threw her arms round the officer's neck. She looked up at him, supplicatingly, with a beautiful smile, and all in tears. Her delicate neck rubbed against the cloth doublet with its rough embroideries. She writhed on her knees, her beautiful body half naked. The intoxicated captain pressed his ardent lips to those lovely African shoulders. The young girl, her eyes bent on the ceiling as she leaned backwards, quivered, all palpitating, beneath this kiss. All at once, above Phoebus's head, she beheld another head, a green, livid, convulsed face, with the look of a lost soul. Near this face was a hand grasping a poniard. It was the face and hand of the priest. He had broken the door, and he was there. Phoebus could not see him. The young girl remained motionless, frozen with terror, dumb beneath that terrible apparition, like a dove which should raise its head at the moment when the hawk is gazing into her nest with its round eyes. She could not even utter a cry. She saw the poniard descend upon Phoebus, and rise again, reeking. "Maledictions!" said the captain, and fell. She fainted. At the moment when her eyes closed, when all feeling vanished in her, she thought that she felt a touch of fire imprinted upon her lips, a kiss more burning than the red-hot iron of the executioner. When she recovered her senses, she was surrounded by soldiers of the watch. They were carrying away the captain. Bathed in his blood, the priest had disappeared. The window at the back of the room which opened on the river was wide open. They picked up a cloak which they supposed to belong to the officer, and she heard them saying around her, "'Tis a sorceress who has stabbed a captain." End of Book 7, Chapter 8. Chapter 1 of The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 8, Chapter 1. The Crown Changed into a Dry Leaf. Gringoire and the entire Court of Miracles were suffering mortal anxiety. For a whole month they had not known what had become of La Esmeralda, which greatly pained the Duke of Egypt and his friends the vagabonds, nor what had become of the goat, which redoubled Gringoire's grief. One evening the gypsy had disappeared, and since that time had given no signs of life. All search had proved fruitless. Some tormenting bootblacks had told Gringoire about meeting her that same evening near the Pont Saint-Michel, going off with an officer. But this husband, after the fashion of Bohemia, was an incredulous philosopher, and besides, he, better than anyone else, knew to what a point his wife was virginal. He had been able to form a judgment as to the unconquerable modesty resulting from the combined virtues of the amulet and the gypsy, and he had mathematically calculated the resistance of that chastity to the second power. Accordingly, he was at ease on that score. Still, he could not understand this disappearance. It was a profound sorrow. He would have grown thin over it had that been possible. He had forgotten everything, even his literary tastes, even his great work, De Figuris Regularibus et Irregularibus, which it was his intention to have printed with the first money which he should procure, for he had raved over printing ever since he had seen the Didascalon of Huguet de Saint-Victor printed with the celebrated characters of Vandeline de Speer. One day, as he was passing sadly before the criminal Tournelle, he perceived a considerable crowd at one of the gates of the Palais de Justice. "What is this?" he inquired of a young man who was coming out. "I know not, sir," replied the young man. "'Tis said that they are trying a woman who hath assassinated a gendarme. It appears that there is sorcery at the bottom of it. The Archbishop and the official have intervened in the case, and my brother, who is the archdeacon of José, can think of nothing else. Now I wish to speak with him, but I have not been able to reach him because of the throng, which vexes me greatly, as I stand in need of money." "Alas, sir," said Gringoire, "I would that I would lend you some, but my breeches are worn to holes, and 'tis not crowns which have done it." He dared not tell the young man that he was acquainted with his brother the Archdeacon, to whom he had not returned after the scene in the church, a negligence which embarrassed him. The scholar went his way, and Gringoire set out to follow the crowd which was mounting the staircase of the great chamber. In his opinion, there was nothing like the spectacle of a criminal process for dissipating melancholy, so exhilaratingly stupid are judges as a rule. The populace which he had joined walked and elbowed in silence. After a slow and tiresome march through a long, gloomy corridor, which wound through the courthouse like the intestinal canal of the ancient edifice, he arrived near a low door, opening upon a hall which his lofty stature permitted him to survey with a glance over the waving heads of the rabble. The hall was vast and gloomy, which latter fact made it appear still more spacious. The day was declining. The long pointed windows permitted only a pale ray of light to enter, which was extinguished before it reached the vaulted ceiling, like an enormous trellis-work of sculptured beams, whose 1,000 figures seemed to move confusedly in the shadows. Many candles were already lighted here and there on tables, and beaming on the heads of clerks buried in masses of documents. The anterior portion of the hall was occupied by the crowd. On the right and left were magistrates and tables. At the end, upon a platform, a number of judges, whose rear rank sank into the shadows, sinister and motionless faces. The walls were sown with innumerable fleurs-de-lis. A large figure of Christ might be vaguely descried above the judges, and everywhere there were pikes and halberds, upon whose points the reflection of the candles placed tips of fire. "Monsieur," Gringoire inquired of one of his neighbours, "who are all those persons ranged yonder, like prelates in council?" "Monsieur," replied the neighbour, "those on the right are the councillors of the Grand Chamber, those on the left the councillors of the Inquiry, the masters in black gowns, the messieurs in red." "Who is that big red fellow, yonder above them, who is sweating?" pursued Gringoire. "It is Monsieur the President." "And those sheep behind him," continued Gringoire, "who, as we have seen, did not love the magistracy, which arose, possibly, from the grudge which he cherished against the Palais de Justice since his dramatic misadventure." "They are messieurs the masters of requests of the king's household." "And that boor in front of him?" "He is Monsieur the clerk of the Court of Parliament." "And that crocodile on the right?" "Master Philippe Lullier, advocate extraordinary of the king." "And that big, black tomcat on the left?" "Master Jacques Charmolue, procurator of the king in the ecclesiastical court, with the gentlemen of the officialty." "Come now, monsieur," said Gringoire, "pray what are all those fine fellows doing yonder?" "They are judging." "Judging whom? I do not see the accused." 'Tis a woman, sir. You cannot see her. She has her back turned to us, and she is hidden from us by the crowd. Stay, yonder she is, where you see a group of partisans." "Who is the woman?" asked Gringoire. "Do you know her name?" "No, monsieur, I have but just arrived. I merely assume that there is some sorcery about it, since the official is present at the trial." "Come," said our philosopher, "we are going to see all these magistrates devour human flesh. 'Tis as good a spectacle as any other." "Monsieur," remarked his neighbour, "think you not that Master Jacques Charmelot has a very sweet air?" Replied Gringoire. "I distrust a sweetness which hath pinched nostrils and thin lips." Here the bystanders imposed silence upon the two chatterers. They were listening to an important deposition. "Messieurs," said an old woman in the middle of the hall, whose form was so concealed beneath her garments that one would have pronounced her a walking heap of rags. "Messieurs, the thing is as true as that I am La Falordel, established these 40 years at the Pont Saint-Michel, and paying regularly my rents, lord's dues, and quit-rents. At the gate opposite the house of Tessin Caillard the dyer, which is on the side up the river. A poor old woman now, but a pretty maid in former days, my lords. Someone said to me lately, 'La Falordel, don't use your spinning-wheel too much in the evening. The devil is fond of combing the distaffs of old women with his horns. 'Tis certain that the surly monk who was round about the temple last year now prowls in the city. Take care, La Falordel, that he doth not knock at your door. One evening I was spinning on my wheel. There comes a knock at my door. I ask who it is. They swear. I open. 2 men enter. A man in black and a handsome officer. Of the black man nothing could be seen but his eyes, 2 coals of fire. All the rest was hat and cloak. They say to me, 'The Saint Martin chamber.' 'Tis my upper chamber, my lords, my cleanest. They give me a crown. I put the crown in my drawer, and I say, 'This shall go to buy tripe at the slaughter-house of La Gloriette tomorrow.' We go upstairs. On arriving at the upper chamber, and while my back is turned, the black man disappears. That dazed me a bit. The officer, who was as handsome as a great lord, goes downstairs again with me. He goes out. In about the time it takes to spin a quarter of a handful of flax, he returns with a beautiful young girl, a doll who would have shone like the sun had she been coiffed. She had with her a goat, a big billy goat, whether black or white I no longer remember. That set me to thinking. The girl does not concern me, but the goat. I love not those beasts. They have a beard and horns. They are so like a man. And then they smack of the witches' Sabbath. However, I say nothing. I had the crown. That is right, is it not, Monsieur Judge? I show the captain and the wench to the upper chamber, and I leave them alone, that is to say, with the goat. I go down and set to spinning again. I must inform you that my house has a ground floor and a story above. I know not why I fell to thinking of the surly monk whom the goat had put into my head again, and then the beautiful girl was rather strangely decked out. All at once I hear a cry upstairs, and something falls on the floor, and the window opens. I run to mine which is beneath it, and I behold a black mass pass before my eyes and fall into the water. It was a phantom clad like a priest. It was a moonlight night. I saw him quite plainly. He was swimming in the direction of the city. Then, all of a tremble, I call the watch. The gentlemen of the police enter, and not knowing just at the first moment what the matter was, and being merry, they beat me. I explain to them. We go upstairs, and what do we find? My poor chamber all blood, the captain stretched out at full length with a dagger in his neck, the girl pretending to be dead, and the goat all in a fright. Pretty work, I say. I shall have to wash that floor for more than a fortnight. It will have to be scraped. It will be a terrible job. They carried off the officer, poor young man, and the wench with her bosom all bare. But wait, the worst is that on the next day, when I wanted to take the crown to buy tripe, I found a dead leaf in its place." The old woman ceased. A murmur of horror ran through the audience. "That phantom, that goat, all smacks of magic," said one of Gringoire's neighbours. "And that dry leaf," added another. "No doubt about it," joined in a third. "She is a witch who has dealings with the surly monk for the purpose of plundering officers." Gringoire himself was not disinclined to regard this as altogether alarming and probable. "Goody Falordel," said the president majestically, "have you nothing more to communicate to the court?" "No, Monseigneur," replied the crone, "except that the report has described my house as a hovel and stinking, which is an outrageous fashion of speaking. The houses on the bridge are not imposing, because there are such multitudes of people, but nevertheless the butchers continue to dwell there, who are wealthy folk, and married to very proper and handsome women." The magistrate, who had reminded Gringoire of a crocodile, rose. "Silence," said he. "I pray the gentleman not to lose sight of the fact that a dagger was found on the person of the accused. Goody Falordel, have you brought that leaf into which the crown which the demon gave you was transformed?" "Yes, Monseigneur," she replied. "I found it again. Here it is." A bailiff handed the dead leaf to the crocodile, who made a doleful shake of the head, and passed it on to the president, who gave it to the procurator of the king in the ecclesiastical court, and thus it made the circuit of the hall. "It is a birch leaf," said Master Jacques Charmilou. "A fresh proof of magic." A councillor took up the word. "Witness, 2 men went upstairs together in your house, the black man, whom you first saw disappear and afterwards swimming in the Seine, with his priestly garments, and the officer. Which of the 2 handed you the crown?" The old woman pondered for a moment, and then said, "The officer." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Ah," thought Gringoire, "this makes some doubt in my mind." But Master Philippe Lullier, advocate extraordinary to the king, interposed once more. "I will recall to these gentlemen that in the deposition taken at his bedside, the assassinated officer, while declaring that he had a vague idea when the black man accosted him that the latter might be the surly monk, added that the phantom had pressed him eagerly to go and make acquaintance with the accused, and upon his, the captain's, remarking that he had no money, he had given him the crown which he said the officer paid to La Falordel. Hence, that crown is the money of hell." This conclusive observation appeared to dissipate all the doubts of Gringoire and the other skeptics in the audience. "You have the documents, gentlemen," added the king's advocate, as he took his seat. "You can consult the testimony of Phoebus de Châteaupay." At that name the accused sprang up, her head rose above the throng. Gringoire, with horror, recognized La Esmeralda. She was pale. Her tresses, formerly so gracefully braided and spangled with sequins, hung in disorder. Her lips were blue. Her hollow eyes were terrible. Alas! "Phoebus," she said in bewilderment, "where is he? Oh, messeigneurs, before you kill me, tell me for pity's sake whether he still lives." "Hold your tongue, woman," replied the president. "That is no affair of ours." "Oh, for mercy's sake, tell me if he is alive," she repeated, clasping her beautiful, emaciated hands, and the sound of her chains in contact with her dress was heard. "Well," said the king's advocate roughly, "he is dying. Are you satisfied?" The unhappy girl fell back on her criminal's seat, speechless, tearless, white as a wax figure. The president bent down to a man at his feet who wore a gold cap and a black gown, a chain on his neck, and a wand in his hand. "Bailiff, bring in the second accused." All eyes turned towards a small door which opened, and to the great agitation of Gringoire gave passage to a pretty goat with horns and hoofs of gold. The elegant beast halted for a moment on the threshold, stretching out its neck as though, perched on the summit of a rock, it had before its eyes an immense horizon. Suddenly it caught sight of the gypsy girl, and leaping over the table and the head of a clerk, in 2 bounds it was at her knees. Then it rolled gracefully on its mistress's feet, soliciting a word or a caress, but the accused remained motionless, and poor Jolly himself obtained not a glance. Why, 'tis my villainous beast," said old Fallordel. "I recognize the two perfectly." Jacques Charmelot interfered. "If the gentlemen please, we will proceed to the examination of the goat." He was, in fact, the second criminal. Nothing more simple in those days than a suit of sorcery instituted against an animal. We find, among others in the accounts of the Provost's office for 1466, a curious detail concerning the expenses of the trial of Gilles Solart and his sow, executed for their demerits at Corbeil. Everything is there: the cost of the pens in which to place the sow, the 500 bundles of brushwood purchased at the port of Morsant, the 3 pints of wine and the bread, the last repast of the victim fraternally shared by the executioner, down to the 11 days of guard and food for the sow, at 8 deniers parisis each. Sometimes they went even further than animals. The capitularies of Charlemagne and of Louis le Debonair impose severe penalties on fiery phantoms which presume to appear in the air. Meanwhile the procurator had exclaimed, "If the demon which possesses this goat, and which has resisted all exorcisms, persists in its deeds of witchcraft, if it alarms the court with them, we warn it that we shall be forced to put in requisition against it the gallows or the stake." Gringoire broke out into a cold perspiration. Charmelot took from the table the gypsy's tambourine, and presenting it to the goat in a certain manner, asked the latter, "What o'clock is it?" The goat looked at it with an intelligent eye, raised its gilded hoof, and struck 7 blows. It was, in fact, 7 o'clock. A movement of terror ran through the crowd. Gringoire could not endure it. "He is destroying himself!" he cried aloud. "You see well that he does not know what he is doing." "Silence among the louts at the end of the hall!" said the bailiff sharply. Jacques Charmelot, by the aid of the same manoeuvres of the tambourine, made the goat perform many other tricks connected with the date of the day, the month of the year, etc., which the reader has already witnessed. And, by virtue of an optical illusion peculiar to judicial proceedings, these same spectators, who had probably more than once applauded in the public square Jolly's innocent magic, were terrified by it beneath the roof of the Palais de Justice. The goat was undoubtedly the devil. It was far worse when the procurator of the king, having emptied upon a floor a certain bag filled with movable letters, which Jolly wore round his neck, they beheld the goat extract with his hoof from the scattered alphabet the fatal name of Phoebus. The witchcraft of which the captain had been the victim appeared irresistibly demonstrated, and in the eyes of all, the gypsy, that ravishing dancer, who had so often dazzled the passers-by with her grace, was no longer anything but a frightful vampire. However, she betrayed no sign of life. Neither Jolly's graceful evolutions, nor the menaces of the court, nor the suppressed imprecations of the spectators any longer reached her mind. In order to arouse her, a police officer was obliged to shake her unmercifully, and the president had to raise his voice. "Girl, you are of the Bohemian race, addicted to deeds of witchcraft. You, in complicity with the bewitched goat implicated in this suit, during the night of the 29th of March last, murdered and stabbed, in concert with the powers of darkness, by the aid of charms and underhand practices, a captain of the King's Archers of the Watch, Phoebus de Châteaupers. Do you persist in denying it?" "Horror!" exclaimed the young girl, hiding her face in her hands. "My Phoebus! Oh, this is hell!" "Do you persist in your denial?" demanded the President coldly. "Do I deny it?" she said with terrible accents, and she rose with flashing eyes. The President continued squarely. "Then how do you explain the facts laid to your charge?" She replied in a broken voice, "I have already told you. I do not know. 'Twas a priest whom I do not know, an infernal priest who pursues me." "That is it," retorted the judge, "the surly monk." "Oh, gentlemen, have mercy! I am but a poor girl—" "Of Egypt," said the judge. Master Jacques Charmelot interposed sweetly, "In view of the sad obstinacy of the accused, I demand the application of the torture." "Granted," said the President. The unhappy girl quivered in every limb, but she rose at the command of the men with partisans and walked with a tolerably firm step, preceded by Charmelot and the priests of the officiality, between two rows of halberds, towards a medium-sized door, which suddenly opened and closed again behind her, and which produced upon the grief-stricken Gringoire the effect of a horrible mouth which had just devoured her. When she disappeared, they heard a plaintive bleating. It was the little goat mourning. The sitting of the court was suspended. A councillor having remarked that the gentlemen were fatigued, and that it would be a long time to wait until the torture was at an end, the President replied that a magistrate must know how to sacrifice himself to his duty. "What an annoying and vexatious hussy," said an aged judge, "to get herself put to the question when one has not supped." End of Book 8, Chapter 1.